So you want to become an expert? In most of the world, you have been told that it takes 10,000 hours of practice, a long list of goals, and a lot of hard work to become an expert. But what you actually become is depressed. In this video, I am going to reveal 5 scientifically proven ways to become an expert in anything within 1 year. When people like you and me say we want to become an expert, it means we want to be paid a higher amount in the job market, and people will trust our advice, which makes you feel confident and important when you are an expert. Warren Buffett once said, "It doesn't matter how bad the times are or how bad the economy is. People are always willing to exchange money for the service and value of an expert." So the very first scientific method is to understand the Pareto principle. The Pareto principle states that in any situation, 20% of the inputs or activities are responsible for 80% of the outputs or results. For example, you wear 20% of your clothes 80% of the time. In a book, 20% of its pages contain 80% of the most important information. 20% of the company's customers produce 80% of company's revenue. When it comes to YouTube, 20% of my videos generate 80% of my views and subscribers. The Pareto principle shows up over and over again in almost every field. But the inverse is also true. That means that the other 80% is only generating 20% of the results. The point is that the majority of results come from minority of causes. Let's take a look at how you can use it in your everyday life. Time is our most precious resource. We all have the same amount of time in our day, but most of us don't use that time efficiently. There's a difference between being busy and being productive. Most people think that working more hours will get them more results. However, it's not about the time you put in, it's about how well you spend that time. If you haven't applied the Pareto principle in your life yet, you're most likely just being busy. However, when the principle is utilized correctly, it enables you to do more by doing less. That's why I said you don't need 10,000 hours to become an expert, because you can do it by focusing only 20% of that. But the problem is, how can you identify those 20% of input that produces the maximum results? Because as a beginner, you have no idea which things are important and which are not. So that's why you need someone who has already been there where you want to be. You need a mentor or a teacher who can guide you towards the right path and remove the guesswork for you. Unfortunately, many people approach this step the wrong way. They think that they will go to the expert of their industry and become their student, which is completely wrong. However, being an expert does not necessarily mean that someone can effectively teach that skill. Therefore, you need to find the right kind of mentor for yourself, someone who excels in their field and knows how to transfer that skill to others. Now, let's talk about our third scientific method. I want you to think about this for a moment as if this is your brain. The average brain is very cluttered because we feed our brain so many different things. We want to know everything about everything, right? 1% of our brain is trying to learn about history, another percent is trying to learn about social media, 3% is trying to learn about faith, 2% is trying to learn about finance. It's so many different things that it prevents us from becoming an expert. Now, what experts normally do is that they're going after is specialized knowledge. So what's the difference between this and specialized knowledge? Well, this is a cluttered mind. Specialists don't want a cluttered mind. They focus their attention on normally one subject. The less the subject, the more specialized you become. The more the subject, the less specialized you become. So if you do this, you eventually become an expert because your mind is consumed only by trying to master one subject. How quickly you become an expert is purely on the speed of how quickly you feed yourself information and retain it. I have explained how to retain the information later in the video. But for now, here's the good news. Once you become an expert, experts tend to attract other experts. So this is your brain, but now you have other experts in your life, and you're able to use the expertise of other people. So your mind becomes a combination of 10 different minds put together. So now you can have the answers to questions because of the other experts you associate yourself with. And the only way this continues is based on Shoshin. In Japanese, it means a beginner's mind. My message to you is to always have the mindset of Shoshin. As we are speaking of becoming an expert, the most common advice you might have heard is to practice, which is a good advice, but most of us do it in a wrong way. Most of us practice like this. We warm up for a little bit, then we run drills on something that we're familiar with to try to perfect it, and then at the very end of the session, or a little bit here and there, we'll try to do something new, something that's on the edge of what we're comfortable with, something that is outside of our comfort zone. So it's probably something like 10% warming up, then 70% practice and trying to perfect old stuff, and finally, the last 20% is trying out new stuff that's beyond what you're comfortable with. Now, according to world-class circus performer Lido Dittmar, this is a wrong approach. The easiest way to start massively improving is by adopting a completely different way of practicing. He suggests warming up and quickly transitioning into the stuff that's past your limits, and then at the very end of your practice session going back to the things that you want to perfect. So his formula looks something more like this: 10% warming up, 70% trying out something that is beyond your current capabilities, and then the last 20% when you start to feel a bit tired. That's when you go back to the stuff that you want to perfect. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, how can you perfect the old stuff if you're spending so much of the time on practicing new stuff? And that's a valid concern, but what's interesting is, according to Lido, if you spend time on things beyond your capabilities, you'll often notice a significant improvement when you go back to practicing the old stuff. For example, he discovered that trying to juggle 8 rings at the same time actually made him better at juggling 6 rings as compared to only practicing with just 6 rings. And the reason this happens is most likely because when you practice things outside of your comfort zone, you're actually learning new techniques that make your overall skill better. You're also being forced to be more present when you're trying to push your limits, and this causes the quality of your practice sessions to be better as you're putting in your entire 100% focus into the session. Lastly, whatever you are doing, start teaching others. Because when you teach, you learn more, and your understanding about that subject becomes more deeper. You retain the information for more longer, which makes you expert of that field. Because explaining concepts to others requires a thorough understanding of the subject matter. Teaching forces you to break down complex ideas into simpler parts, leading to a deeper understanding of the material yourself. When teaching, you often encounter questions or areas where your own knowledge is lacking. This motivates you to do further research and learning to fill those gaps, ultimately enhancing your understanding. Additionally, interacting with students or learners can offer fresh perspectives on familiar topics. Their questions and insights may challenge your assumptions or provide alternative ways of thinking about the subject, broadening your understanding. But there's still a problem left. I know most of you guys are already very good at what you do, but you don't know it yet because you can't articulate yourself like an expert. So it's very important that you know how to communicate your thoughts clearly so that you can present yourself as an expert easily. You can watch my next video in order to learn how you can articulate without learning new words.